There's a moment that arrives in every person's life when someone wrongs you so deeply that your entire being screams for retribution. Your pulse quickens. Your thoughts spiral into elaborate fantasies of justice, of evening the score, of watching them feel what you felt. And in that moment, you believe that revenge will bring you peace. But here's what nobody tells you. The desire for revenge is not a sign of strength. It's a prison you build for yourself, brick by brick, with bars made of someone else's actions. Before we go deeper, if you're someone who's ever felt the burning need to make someone pay for what they did, stay with me. This isn't about forgiveness in the way you've heard it preached. This is about something far more powerful. And if this resonates with you, consider subscribing, because we're exploring the kind of wisdom that changes how you move through the world. The Roman philosopher Seneca lived in a time of political treachery, exile, and constant threat. He watched friends betray each other for power. He himself was exiled, stripped of everything he built, sent to a barren island for 8 years because of palace intrigue and lies. And yet, when he wrote about those who wronged him, he didn't write with bitterness. He wrote with something that looks, from the outside, almost like indifference. But it wasn't indifference born of not caring. It was indifference born of profound understanding. Seneca understood something that modern psychology is only now confirming. Holding on to the need for revenge doesn't hurt your enemy. It consumes you. Research from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology shows that people who ruminate on revenge experience higher levels of stress hormones, disrupted sleep patterns, and diminished cognitive function. Your body doesn't distinguish between planning revenge and experiencing the original hurt. It relives the trauma every single time you rehearse your retaliation. Think about what happens when someone wrongs you. In those first moments, the injury is real. The pain is acute, but then something interesting happens. The actual event ends, but your mind doesn't let it end. You replay it. You imagine what you should have said. You fantasize about confrontation. You calculate how to hurt them back. And with each replay, you're not healing. You're reopening the wound. You become a curator of your own suffering, carefully preserving every detail of the injury so you can justify the revenge you're planning. This is where Seneca's wisdom cuts through our modern understanding of justice. He wrote in his essay, On Anger, that the greatest remedy for anger is delay. Not because delay helps you plan better revenge, but because delay reveals that revenge was never what you needed. What you needed was to stop giving your offender power over your inner life. Every moment you spend plotting their downfall is a moment they're still controlling you, still living rent-free in the space where your peace should be. We like to think of revenge as taking back power. We imagine it as the moment we finally regain control. But watch what actually happens to people consumed by the need for retribution. They become smaller. Their world shrinks to the size of their grievance. Conversations circle back to the same wound. Opportunities pass unnoticed because they're watching over their shoulder. They're so focused on making someone else lose that they forget to notice they're already losing, day after day, to an obsession that feeds on their attention. The Stoics had a practice they called turning the obstacle upside down, finding opportunity in every difficulty. But with revenge, the practice goes deeper. The question isn't, how can I turn this wrong into something useful? The question is, why am I giving this person the power to define my emotional state? Because that's what revenge really is. Outsourcing your peace of mind to someone else's suffering. You're saying, in effect, I cannot be okay until they are not okay. You've handed them the keys to your well-being and made their downfall the condition for your happiness. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journals, asked himself, how much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it? This isn't a call to suppress anger. The Stoics weren't about pretending you don't feel what you feel. This is about recognizing that the consequences of nurturing anger, the stress, the obsession, the bitterness, are often worse than the original offense. Your enemy struck you once, but you, through your rumination and your fantasies of revenge, you're striking yourself over and over again. Consider the mechanics of what you're doing when you plan revenge. You're keeping the person who hurt you at the center of your thoughts. You're making them the main character in your internal narrative. You're giving them more of your time, more of your mental energy, more of your life than they ever deserved in the first place. The person who cut you off in traffic gets hours of your rage. The colleague who undermined you gets days of your scheming. The ex who betrayed you gets months of your bitterness. And they're out there living their lives while you're trapped in the moment they hurt you. Seneca saw this clearly because he lived through it. When he was exiled, when powerful men destroyed his reputation and took everything from him, he could have spent those 8 years consumed with plans for revenge. Instead, he studied, he wrote, he developed the philosophy that would influence minds for 2,000 years. He didn't ignore what happened to him. He simply refused to let it be the defining feature of his existence. He understood that real power isn't in making your enemies suffer. Real power is in making their actions irrelevant to your peace. This is the art of indifference Seneca taught. Not indifference to justice, not indifference to right and wrong, but indifference to the personal satisfaction of revenge. It's the ability to say, what happened, happened. It was wrong. And now I'm going to move forward as though this person has no power over my internal state, because they don't, unless I give it to them. There's a neuroscience basis for this wisdom. The default mode network in your brain, the part that activates when you're not focused on a task, tends to replay past grievances and imagine future threats. It's a survival mechanism that helped our ancestors prepare for danger. But in modern life, this same mechanism keeps you locked in cycles of rumination. Your brain treats social betrayal the same way it treats physical threat. It wants you to stay vigilant, to keep the offender in view, to prepare your defense or your attack. And this constant state of vigilance exhausts you. When Seneca talks about indifference, he's offering a way to override this programming. He's saying, you can acknowledge what happened without letting it dominate your consciousness. You can recognize someone wronged you without making their punishment your life's mission. You can hold people accountable through appropriate channels without destroying yourself in the process of destroying them. This is freedom, not freedom from ever being wronged, but freedom from being controlled by those wrongs. The path to this kind of indifference isn't about pretending you weren't hurt. That's just suppression, and suppression always finds a way to leak out, usually at the worst moments. The path is about understanding the true nature of what happened and responding from wisdom rather than from wound. And that requires us to look at something uncomfortable: why we want revenge in the first place. At its core, revenge is about validation. When someone wrongs you, especially publicly, there's a sense that the universe is now unbalanced. Your reputation, your dignity, your worth has been questioned or diminished. And revenge promises to restore the balance. It promises to prove to yourself and to everyone watching that you're not someone who can be treated that way. It's an attempt to force external validation of your value. But here's the trap. If your sense of self-worth requires external validation through someone else's punishment, you've already lost. You've made yourself dependent on circumstances you can't fully control. What if your revenge fails? What if they don't suffer as much as you want them to? What if nobody notices or cares? Then you're left exactly where you started, except now you've also invested time, energy, and possibly your integrity in a failed attempt to feel better about yourself. The Stoics approached this differently. They built their sense of worth from within, from their own character and choices, not from how others treated them or what others thought of them. Epictetus, who spent years as a slave before gaining his freedom, taught that no person has the power to harm you unless you give it to them. The harm isn't in what they do to you. The harm is in allowing what they do to corrupt your character in response. This is radical, and it's worth sitting with. The person who betrayed you, who lied about you, who attacked you, they cannot actually touch what matters most about you unless you let them. They can damage your reputation, yes. They can cause practical problems in your life. But your core, your character, your ability to live according to your values, that remains untouched unless you compromise it through obsessive bitterness or through becoming the kind of person who lives for revenge. Think about the person you become when you're consumed with getting even. Are you more patient or less patient with people who have nothing to do with your grievance? Are you more generous or more suspicious? Are you more present with the people you love, or are you distracted by your plots and fantasies? The person who wronged you is shaping you, molding you into a harder, colder version of yourself. And you're allowing it because you think revenge will make you whole again. But revenge doesn't make you whole. At best, it gives you a brief spike of satisfaction, a moment of finally, and then emptiness. Studies on revenge satisfaction show that people consistently overestimate how good revenge will feel and underestimate how empty they'll feel afterward. The fantasy is always better than the reality because the fantasy promises resolution, but the reality reveals that no amount of external action can fix an internal wound. Seneca knew this. He wrote, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." And the person obsessed with revenge is everywhere except where they need to be. Here, now, in their actual life, building something meaningful. You're mentally everywhere your enemy is, imagining their downfall, checking to see if they're suffering yet, strategizing your next move. And in being everywhere with them, you're nowhere in your own life. You're absent from your growth, from your relationships, from your purpose. So what's the alternative? How do you actually practice this art of indifference? It starts with a shift in perspective, a reframe that changes everything. Instead of asking, "How can I make them pay?" ask, "How can I remove their power over me?" These are not the same question. The first keeps you attached. The second sets you free. The first practical strategy is what the Stoics called contemplation of the cosmos, or in more accessible terms, the practice of perspective. When you're wronged, your entire world can seem to collapse into that one event. It becomes everything. The Stoics recommended regularly zooming out, seeing your life from a distance. In 100 years, will this matter? In the scope of all the challenges humanity faces, how much space does this deserve in your consciousness? This isn't about minimizing real harm. It's about putting it in proportion so it doesn't devour everything else. Seneca himself used this practice during his exile. He wrote to his mother, helping her see that his exile, while unjust, was not the end of everything. He was alive. He could still think, still write, still contribute. The men who exiled him had power over his location, but not over his mind. He chose to spend his time developing ideas that would outlive empires rather than plotting against men who would be forgotten by history. The second strategy is to understand the person who wronged you with almost scientific detachment. Not to excuse them, but to see them clearly. Most people who hurt others are themselves hurt, operating from fear, insecurity, or their own trauma. This doesn't make what they did acceptable, but it removes the element of it being personal in a cosmic sense. They didn't do it because you're unworthy. They did it because of who they are, their limitations, their wounds. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They're like this because they can't tell good from evil. This understanding creates space. It doesn't mean you trust them or let them close again. It means you see them as they are, flawed humans acting from their own pain or ignorance, and you stop taking their actions as a referendum on your worth. Their bad behavior is information about them, not about you. The third strategy is to redirect the energy you would spend on revenge toward building something that matters to you. Seneca didn't just avoid revenge during his exile. He used that time to create work that shaped Western philosophy. He transformed the worst period of his life into his most productive. Not because he was superhuman, but because he understood that the energy he could spend on bitterness was the same energy he could spend on contribution. It's the same pool of life force. You get to choose where it goes. This is where the art of indifference reveals its true nature. It's not passive. It's not about lying down and letting people walk over you. It's about recognizing that the highest form of victory is not making your enemy suffer. It's making their actions irrelevant by building a life so rich, so purposeful, so aligned with your values that their betrayal becomes a footnote rather than the main story. There's a moment in the practice of indifference that feels like crossing a threshold. It's the moment when you realize you haven't thought about the person who wronged you in days, maybe weeks. Not because you forced it, not because you're suppressing it, but because you've genuinely become interested in something else. Your life has expanded beyond the boundaries of that wound. And when you do think of them, it's without the charge, without the heat. It's just a fact, something that happened, filed away with all the other things that happened. This moment is freedom, but getting there requires navigating some difficult terrain. Because between the initial wound and that eventual indifference lies a valley where all your impulses scream at you to act, to strike back, to balance the scales. This is where most people get stuck. They know intellectually that revenge won't help, but the emotional pull is so strong. So let's talk about how to navigate this valley. The Stoics had a practice they called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Before trouble came, they would imagine it, prepare for it mentally. But there's a version of this practice that works after you've been wronged. It's the practice of imagining the full consequences of revenge before you act on it. Not just the immediate satisfaction, but everything that comes after. Imagine you get your revenge. You expose them, you ruin them, you make them suffer as you suffered. Then what? The day after your revenge succeeds, you wake up. Who are you now? Are you the person you want to be? What did you have to become to pull it off? What lines did you cross? What parts of yourself did you compromise? And most importantly, are you actually at peace, or are you just waiting for the next hit of satisfaction, the next update on their continued suffering? This exercise isn't about talking yourself out of action. It's about seeing the full picture. Sometimes, when you play out the whole movie instead of just the revenge scene, you realize the price is higher than you want to pay. You realize that becoming the kind of person who could execute that revenge would cost you more than the revenge would gain you. There's also the practical reality that Seneca understood well. Revenge rarely ends where you think it will. It starts cycles. In his time, family feuds could last generations, each act of revenge spawning another. In our time, it looks different, but the principle holds. The colleague you undermine may sabotage your next project. The ex you trash publicly may reveal secrets you'd rather keep private. The enemy you make may have resources or connections you didn't anticipate. Revenge is not a clean transaction. It's the beginning of a story you can't control. But beyond the practical risks, there's something deeper. Every act of revenge changes you. It moves you further from the person you could be and closer to being defined by your wounds. There's a line from Nietzsche that gets quoted a lot. He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. This isn't poetic exaggeration. This is observable reality. People who dedicate themselves to vengeance become hard, calculating, suspicious. They have to pull it off effectively. And those qualities don't just turn off when the revenge is complete. They become part of who you are. Seneca's art of indifference is actually an art of preservation. It's about preserving your humanity, your capacity for joy, your openness to connection, your ability to trust and be surprised by life. All of these things atrophy when you're in revenge mode. You can't be both the person plotting someone's downfall and the person fully present to a beautiful sunset. You can't be both the person nursing grievances and the person open to new friendships. The mental space doesn't exist for both. So the practice becomes, every time you feel the pull toward revenge, every time the fantasies start playing, you pause and ask, what am I preserving by letting this go? What am I protecting by choosing indifference? The answer is always, you're preserving yourself. You're protecting your peace, your potential, your ability to move forward unencumbered. Now, let's address something important. Choosing indifference is not the same as choosing inaction in the face of wrong. The Stoics believed in justice. They believed in appropriate response. If someone commits a crime, the legal system should address it. If someone violates agreed upon rules in a relationship or workplace, there should be consequences. Indifference isn't about letting harmful behavior continue unchecked. It's about your internal relationship to the wrong and the person who did it. You can pursue justice without the heat of revenge. You can set boundaries without bitterness. You can protect yourself and others without making someone suffering your goal. The difference is in your motivation and your attachment to outcome. Justice seeks appropriate consequence for the protection of community standards. Revenge seeks personal satisfaction through another's pain. One is about principle, the other is about ego. This distinction matters because it clarifies what you're actually doing. When you take action from a place of indifference, meaning you're not emotionally attached to making them suffer, you're clearer, more strategic, more effective. You're not clouded by emotion. You're not making mistakes because you're angry. You're simply doing what the situation requires and then moving on. Your well-being doesn't depend on their punishment. You're taking action because it's right, not because you need it to feel whole. Marcus Aurelius provides a helpful framework here. He wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." This is the heart of Stoic indifference. Your response to wrong is not to become like the wrongdoer, not to descend to their level, but to rise. To demonstrate through your character that you cannot be pulled down into the muck of pettiness and vindictiveness. This is harder than revenge. It requires more strength, but it also builds more strength. Think about the people in history we most admire. The leaders who faced betrayal with dignity. The activists who met violence with nonviolence. The individuals who, when given every reason to become bitter, chose grace instead. We don't remember them because they got revenge. We remember them because they transcended the need for it. They made their response itself a teaching, a demonstration of what's possible for human character under pressure. You have this same choice. Every wrong you face is an opportunity to show who you are at your core. Not who you are when everything's easy, but who you are when tested. And the person obsessed with revenge is showing that they can be controlled by external events, that their peace is hostage to what others do. The person practicing indifference is showing something far more powerful, that their inner state is their own, that they choose their response based on their values, not on their wounds. As we come to the end of this exploration, there's one final layer to Seneca's art of indifference that we need to understand. It's not just about what you're avoiding by not seeking revenge. It's about what you're gaining by choosing a different path. Because indifference, properly understood, isn't emptiness. It's not a void where your anger used to be. It's a clearing, a space where something new can grow. When you release the need for revenge, you release a tremendous amount of energy. The energy you were spending on rumination, on planning, on checking to see if they're suffering yet, all of that becomes available for other things. For creativity, for building, for connecting, for learning. People who practice genuine indifference to wrongs don't become passive or weak. They become focused. They become formidable in a different way. They direct their force toward what they're building rather than toward what they're destroying. Seneca himself is proof of this principle. After his exile, after being recalled to Rome, he became the tutor and later advisor to the future Emperor Nero. He had influence, wealth, and power. The men who had exiled him were either dead or diminished. He could have spent his energy settling old scores. Instead, he spent it trying to shape a better ruler, writing philosophy that would outlast empires, and developing a framework for human flourishing that we're still discussing 2 millennia later. His indifference to revenge allowed him to focus on legacy. This is what becomes possible when you're not chained to past wrongs. You can think bigger. You can plan longer. You can build something that matters more than any revenge ever could. The person consumed with getting even is always looking backward, always measuring themselves against the person who wronged them. The person practicing indifference is looking forward, measuring themselves against who they want to become. There's also a profound peace that comes with this practice. Not the peace of resolution in the way we usually think about it, where every wrong is righted and every score is settled. But the peace of acceptance. The understanding that people will wrong you. It's part of living in a world with other flawed humans. And you can spend your life in a constant state of agitation about this, always finding new reasons to be angry, new people to put on your list. Or you can accept it as part of the human experience and focus on what you control. Your response, your character, your choices. This acceptance isn't resignation. It's not deciding that nothing matters or that you should just let people hurt you without response. It's recognizing that some things are simply outside your control, including other people's choices and characters, and that your power lies in how you meet those things, not in your ability to make others behave as you wish they would. The Stoics called this amor fati, love of fate. It's the practice of not just accepting but actually embracing everything that happens, including the difficult things, because they're all part of your life story, all opportunities for growth and demonstration of character. When someone wrongs you, amor fati says, "This too is part of my path. What can I learn from this? How can I use this to become stronger, wiser, more compassionate? Not how can I make them pay, but how can I grow?" This might sound idealistic, but it's actually deeply practical. Because the alternative, living in a constant state of vigilance and grievance, is exhausting and ultimately futile. You cannot control what others do. You cannot prevent all wrongs. You cannot make everyone who hurts you suffer proportionately. But you can control your internal response. You can choose not to let their actions define your emotional state. You can choose to be indifferent to their power over you. As we close, let's recap what we've covered, because this is a practice you'll need to return to again and again. Life will keep giving you opportunities to choose revenge or indifference. The practice is choosing indifference each time, building the habit until it becomes your default. We started by recognizing that revenge is not strength but a prison you build for yourself. Every moment spent planning someone's downfall is a moment they're controlling you. We explored how revenge is really about seeking external validation of your worth, and how that's a trap that keeps you dependent on circumstances you can't control. We looked at practical strategies, zooming out for perspective, understanding the person who wronged you with detachment, redirecting your energy toward building something meaningful. We distinguished between indifference and inaction, between letting go of revenge and pursuing appropriate justice. And we ended by seeing indifference not as emptiness but as a clearing where something new can grow. where your energy becomes available for creation rather than destruction. The path forward is not about never feeling the initial sting of betrayal or the flash of anger when you're wronged. Those are human responses. The path is about not setting up camp in those feelings. It's about feeling them, acknowledging them, and then choosing your response based on who you want to be, not based on what they did. Seneca faced exile, betrayal, and eventually was ordered to commit suicide by the same emperor he had tutored. And in his final moments, he was calm. Not because his life had been easy or fair, but because he had spent it practicing this art of indifference. He had spent it building something that mattered more than any revenge, a philosophy of how to live well despite circumstance. And 2,000 years later, we're still learning from him. That's the power of choosing indifference over revenge. Your suffering ends. Their power over you ends. And your life becomes your own again. Not the life you would have had if they hadn't wronged you. That life is gone, if it ever existed. But a life you build from here, from now, with the wisdom that comes from being tested and choosing grace over bitterness. If this resonated with you, if you're someone trying to break free from the prison of revenge and reclaim your peace, subscribe for more insights like this. We're building a community of people committed to inner strength and wisdom, to becoming the kind of people who cannot be pulled down by circumstance or by others' failures. The path isn't easy, but it's worth walking. Remember, you don't need revenge. You never did. What you need is freedom from the person who wronged you, freedom from the constant mental replay, freedom to build a life that matters more than any score settling ever could. And that freedom is available to you right now, in this moment, through the simple but profound practice of indifference. The art of indifference is the art of taking back your life. Not someday, when they finally suffer enough, but now, today, by choosing to be defined not by what was done to you, but by how you responded to it. That's where your power lies. That's where your peace waits.